Welcome back to the FloTrack Podcast. FloTrackPodcast@gmail.com is our email address. You can also find our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and on the website, FloTrack.org/FloTrack Podcast. I'm Kevin, joined by Gordon, who's adjusting his mic, adjusting his camera, but has assured me he's ready to go.
Oh, I'm ready to go. Kevin, I missed you, man. We haven't done a pod in so long.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things I want to catch up with you, talk about the NBA. And it's really frustrating because I know this is a track and field podcast, but I really, really want to talk about the NBA and I can't, and it hurts me. Part of me thinks we should make an NBA podcast that we put on FloTrack for all the subset of NBA/track fans. But
There's a lot of them.
because I'm not going to lie, we're about to talk about that proposed NCAA cross-country new regional system, but I want to think about the ideas of how they're going to do the playoffs in a bubble in Orlando, Florida, in Disney World, for the NBA. And I sent you a long description of how they should do the NBA playoffs. You didn't respond.
Yeah, I ignored that on purpose. I think you need other things to do. You make fun of me for following track athletes on Instagram, and you had that's the longest text I've ever received, by the way. It just kept going. And I didn't know if it was yours or you copied and pasted it from a Zach Lowe article or where it came from.
No, I wrote it, and I just copied it from my desktop Word document to you because I wanted you to see it. Did you read it? You didn't even read it?
No, because here's what they should do. Cancel the season and start again in October fresh. That's what they should do. Or if they really want to do the season, just start with the playoffs and figure everything else out. It's real simple. You don't need to do all this other stuff. Listen, I am a Spurs fan, as people can see if you're watching. I'm ready to call it a season. I'm fine with the playoff streak ending. Let's just move it forward. I don't want to discuss that anymore. All these what happens to the team in 13th place? You know what? They're in 13th place. And the Spurs are in 13th place or whatever they're in. I'm fine. They had plenty of chances to get in the top 8. Just keep it moving. Before we start, though, trivia question for you. You ready for this?
Hit me. Yeah.
Who was the last non-family member to ride in my car?
The last non-family member to ride in your car?
Yes. And by family member, I mean my wife and 2 kids. I'm not even talking about extended family. Who was the last person who was not in my family to ride in my vehicle?
Is it me?
It was Gordon Mack. Yes.
Why? Why was I in your car?
Driving back from the canceled NCAA indoor meet.
Oh, yeah.
I gave you a ride home. You famously don't actually know where you live, so you could not give me directions to your house. We almost drove off the freeway at one point. But when you said, hey, I miss you, I haven't seen you in a while, it made me think back, well, when's the last time I saw you? And it was when we came back from Albuquerque a couple of days early because the meet got canceled, and then you wanted a ride, and that was it. I haven't driven very far since then, and no one else has been in my car other than my immediate family. So I guess congrats, Gordon, is what I'm saying.
So if the world does go to shit, I'll be the last memory of your car. That made no sense, but but yeah, the reason why I brought up the NBA, because you're talking about proposals of how to help the 13th place team or the 9th place team in the West. That's what this whole situation is with cross-country proposals. We know that the teams that can win or going to win or in contention to win are going to go to NCAAs no matter what regional system you create, because there's no way NAU won't make the meet. There's no way Oregon, when they're good, won't make the meet, because they didn't make the meet one year, but they weren't good. But you get the idea. The good teams will survive, especially when you're going to have 20 to 30 teams at the NCAA level at the championship. The odds that a team that could have won was ranked 22nd in the country or 32nd in the country, no, that's not happening. But a week or two ago, me and Lincoln, we discussed how they had this proposal of change to the regional system. I know Dave Smith was on the Beneath the Grandstand podcast with Alex and Ryan talking about it briefly. And then there was a report by Stride Report that leaked the proposal, the first round proposal of how they would do this new regional qualification system. Now, before we get into it, I want to talk about a little caveat. Lincoln, with me, talked about how every 3 or 4 months, we see this new, we're changing track. We saw we're turning the 1,500 into a mile. we're switching the 8K to a 10K for the 6K to a 10K for women, or the 10K to 8K for men, or whatever. And we hear all these changes that never happen, right? And it makes a big splash for like 3 days, and then it's over. And I think Lincoln was like, this is just another one of those big splashes where change isn't going to happen. We're going to talk about change, but never is going to happen. But in this situation, change actually is going to happen. I was talking to a coach about this, and basically he explained it this way. The NCAA has a lot of time on their hands because there was no March Madness, there's no spring sports. So they're spending their time just kind of thinking about their other sports. They had time, right? And they finally got around to looking at what's cross country doing with their shit. What's the cross country situation going on? And they looked at
What's
cross
this
country
thing we speak of?
Yeah, they look at
What
cross
is this
country
thing?
and they're like, hold on, you're telling us we need to put on 10 meets, 10 being 9 regions and the NCAA championship for one division. So multiply by 3. I'm not sure how many regions are in D2, D3. Is it also 9? Is it? I don't
That's
know.
a Lincoln question. Yeah, you're forgetting who you're talking to here.
I assume it's 9, 8 or 9, whatever. But for this conversation, we'll just only focus on D1. But NCAA was like, all right, you're telling us we have to find 10 sites. We have to hire 10 timers. We have to staff up, like, plan for 10 meets for a cross country season. And they're like, why are we doing this? This is 10. Why do we need 10? Like, that's a lot of money, to hire the
You're
timers.
talking about the 9 regions plus the championship, right?
Plus
That's what you're saying, 10?
Yeah. They're like, this is crazy. And they're like, okay, well, how important are these 9 regions? And they're like, okay, wait, these 9 regions are all comers meets? Everyone gets to go? We're hosting 9 all comers meets every year forever. Like, why are we doing this? This doesn't make no sense. So the NCAA said, hey, we're not doing that. We're not gonna put on 9 all comers meets for this sport. No other sport gets all these all comers meets. So this is what you're gonna do. You only get 4 or 5, and you only get 80 teams. And we want you to make sure conference champions auto qualified like they do in all the other sports. Figure it out. And then that was it. So the NCAA said, you have to change. We're not going to tell you how to change it, but we will tell you that the end result needs to be 4 or 5 regionals where only 80 teams make it. And of those 80 teams, 32 of them need to be the conference champion. The rest, you can figure out. Now, there's also another caveat to this. And in our community, care a lot about the specifics and the dynamics of the sport and like the unfairness. Like we look at like the mountain region is super deep or the West regional's deep, and we care about all the little like, ooh, this is making it easy for Arkansas. This is making it really hard for Colorado State, et cetera, et cetera. And we can care about this stuff. And as sports media and fans, we will, because if it was the NBA, we would talk about how the West is deeper than the East. It's unfair for Oklahoma City, but easy for Orlando, whatever. The NCAA doesn't care.
That's NBA reference for those of you who aren't following.
Another NBA reference. The NCAA doesn't care. The NCAA isn't thinking about it being unfair for the 5th best mountain region team or the 6th best West region team. They don't know. Okay. All they care about is just putting on a meet to meet the requirement of having cross country, because the NCAA really only cares about is March Madness and college football. Like that's just reality. Like the rest of it is just like icing, and like we just got to put it on, let the other people figure it out. And so when we talk about this new system that we came up with, in the end, NCAA doesn't care if it's unfair. The NCAA won't care if it's like, oh, this, that. The coaches will, but the NCAA will not, because all they care about is making it 5 regions or 4 with 80 teams. As long as it's that, we don't care how unfair or fair it is. And so this was the first iteration of them trying to create a regional system that fits this new requirement. 80 teams, 4 or 5 regionals, 32 conference champions. And so if you guys have been on the internet, you might have seen the proposal. What they did was they came up with 5 regions: Atlantic, North Central, South, Southeast, and West. And then basically they decided to put entire conferences into each region. and to make
Okay.
it kind of equal. So most of the regions have about 70 to 50 to 70 teams eligible for that conference. So like Atlantic is the American East, Atlantic 10, ACC, Colonial, Ivy, Northeast, and Patriot. I could go through them all, but basically it's about 6 to 7 conferences per region. Now,
Okay.
on face value, you're like, oh, this is kind of a good idea. Like, okay, you got these, you have your conference champions as round one, and then the conference champions qualify for the regional, and then take all these at larges from these 6 conferences into that region. Boom, and then you qualify to the next round, whatever. So I like the structure of it. However,
Mhm.
you look into the fairness of it, and it is kind of wild. So I'm
Hold
gonna
on,
read
before
off
we
to
get
you.
that far.
Okay,
Before
sorry.
we get that far, I have a question. So the conference champions would advance. They would get
Yes.
a ticket to this regional meet, and then the
Yeah.
other teams would fill out with at-large bids. How do we think those at-large bids are going to be decided? Will it be similar to how at-larges are advanced to the national meet now with some sort of point system? How will they determine that?
Yes. I think we're under the assumption that the at larges will be decided based on the way we do the coalesce system, but it'll be on conference championship finish.
Okay, so
So
Colorado wins the Pac-12 meet for the women. Stanford gets second, but Stanford has accumulated all these points. They're a no-brainer. They're in, and so on
yes,
and so forth. And then
and
they
so
consider the
there.
third team in the Pac-12, and then the fourth team in the Pac-12, and then the fifth team like that. Is that how they would do it?
Yeah. So for in this situation, that this, let's say like the West. So let's look
Mm-hmm.
at the West region. How it would work. Let me bring up the conferences that are in the West region. Hold on. So the conferences that are in the West region are Big Sky, Big West, Mountain West, Pac-12, West Coast Conference, and the WAC. So there would be 6
That's
conference
insane if you
champions.
think about it.
Yeah,
Like, so
Pac-12,
that's
Mountain West,
so
and Big
just
Sky.
off. Yeah, so just off the top of my head, that's NAU, that's BYU, that's all the Pac-12 teams, that's New Mexico, Air Force, Boise State. That's a loaded region.
And it's also, and
Anyway,
then it's also Portland. You know,
oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. So anyway, what happened is there's those. So those are the conferences in the West. So look at that. There's 6 conferences: Big Sky, Big West, Mountain West, Pac-12, West Coast. 6 teams get selected. Those conference champions go to the West region. And then
Yeah.
the remaining 14 teams are going to those 6 conferences. So I'm assuming they're going to do it the Colos way to pick the remaining 14 teams that make it to the West Regional. You know, are they going to do
Mhm.
it by order of your finish at conferences? I don't know. They might just go straight to a pure point system, regardless of where you finish in your conference meet. I don't know. They haven't decided that yet. But in this situation, you know, getting, it's going to be harder. I guess Pac-12 is going to hope that they have. If you're not the one, if you don't win Pac-12s, you have to make sure you did really well during the regular season to make sure you got all your points, because NAU can just sleep all week and then win the Big Sky the same way like Iona can sleep all week, all year long, and then win their conference. But anyway, so that's
Yeah.
what would happen. Now, is it possible that there's going to be a 21st team among those 6 conferences that probably could have made NCAAs? I don't know. I mean, let's think about the math right now. I mean, West, Big Sky, you have NAU will go. Any other teams in the Big Sky that you feel like this past year deserve to make NCAAs? Probably not.
You
Maybe
talking
Southern Utah.
you talking men or
Maybe
women?
Southern men. Let's yeah,
Mhm.
men. For the argument's sake, for simplicity's sake, let's say men. So say Southern Utah and NAU get out of the Big Sky, so that's 2, and then Big
Mhm.
West. None of those teams are good, but one of them gets to go, so that's 3. Mountain West,
Mhm.
say there's Air Force, Boise, Colorado State, so that now
Okay.
we're at 6. Pac-12, you could do Colorado, Oregon, Stanford, UCLA, Washington State. So now we're at 12. West Coast Conference can get 2. BYU and Portland. So now we're at
Mm-hmm.
14.
14.
WAC will get 1, 15. And then you'll be able to find 5 more. So like there's not like this is definitely the hardest region, but like we're still going to be able to find. There's not going to be a 21st team in the West region that be like, we got snubbed, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because I just listed all the main good teams just by history, and I only got to 15. So add another 5, you should be fine.
Okay.
That makes sense?
So, yeah. So, but you dug into the numbers about regional balance here based on these proposed regions. And when you dug into those numbers, what did you find?
Yeah. So let me bring that up. So I think qualifying to the regional, I think is still going to be relatively, like I said, fair because to find 20 among those 6 conferences is pretty easy. Where did my document go? I lost my
And then
document.
are they going? So then they're going 80 down to 31 still? Is that what the process would be? So it would go these regional meets down to a championship, but it would go, you'd still have 31 teams at that point. How would
I
they
think they go
figure
to
out how to
32.
get?
I think they're going down to 32.
How are they making those cuts? Is that the similar
So
situation to what they have?
It would be so it'd be before we get to that, let's talk about So let's talk about the teams that would make the meet. Fudge. Can't find my document. Oh, here we go. Okay. So let's talk. Well, let's, for argument's sake, think about the men. So this is the number of teams. So I looked at from 2016 to 2019. So the last 4 years. Okay. So the last 4 NCAA championships. I figured out how many teams from this specific new created region have finished top 20 at the NCAA meet. So whether they finished top 20 in 2017 and that's it, but that counted as a mark just to see the depth, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the men's side, the Atlantic has 6 teams that have finished top 20 in the last 4 years. North Central has 7. The South has 2. The Southeast has 5, and the West has 15. So the Southeast, North Central, Atlantic are pretty even. The South sucks, only has 2, and the West has 15. So that West is good. That's on the men's side. On the women's side, the Atlantic has 5, North Central 7, South has 2, Southeast has 8, and West has 13. So basically, at Atlantic, 3 of the regions are pretty even. One of them is really weak, and one of them is really hard, which is the West. So the West is really hard, South is really easy, and the rest are kind of easy. The rest are like average, normal.
In the middle. But that West number is still under 20.
No, that's how many. Yeah.
Oh, that's
true,
how many you're going.
20.
Okay. Well, but now, but now we get to my next question, right? Which is going from regionals to nationals. So how many teams from the West could then qualify for the national meet? Do we know the details there? Is it going to be similar to how it is now?
So, I mean, theoretically, so
a whole
it's
bunch,
3
right?
auto. It's 3 auto bids, and then the rest are at large. So, I mean, you assume that if they could just like get all the at large bids, right?
Okay.
That's what you would assume. So, but basically, the South is only it's only. I mean, check out the South is like a joke. These are the conferences in the South region. Big 12. Okay, that's good. You got Iowa State, Oklahoma State, Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Conference USA. No, you might get Middle Tennessee State if they're good one year on the men's side.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Because then you have the Florida Atlantics, Florida International, Louisiana Tech, Marshall. Like, they're not good teams. Then you have the MEAC, which is Coppin State, Delaware State, Florida A&M. You know, all these stalwart cross-country programs. Morgan State, Norfolk State, North Carolina A&T. Then you have South Arkansas, Houston Baptist, Incarnate Word, Lamar, McNeese State, New Orleans, Sun Belt Conference, which is App State, Arkansas State, Coastal Carolina, Troy, Texas State, Little Rock, and SWAC Conference, which is Alabama A&M, Alabama State, Alcorn State, Arkansas Pine Bluff, etc., Grambling State. So the SWAC, the
You're saying
Sun
they're
Belt,
gonna
the
get two
Southland, the MEAC. No, you're gonna get 3 out of this no matter what,
or
and it's
three.
gonna be the
Sorry, you're
3
gonna get
Big
yeah,
12.
yeah.
It's gonna be the 3
Right.
Big 12 teams basically every year.
Okay. And the SEC, they're gonna probably dominate their region as well. Arkansas is not
No,
gonna
because
have any trouble.
no, SEC's got some teams. I mean, they have Furman from the Southern Conference. They
Okay.
also have the Big East, so they'll have a Georgetown, a Villanova potentially coming in there. Big South has nobody. The Atlantic Sun doesn't really have anybody, and then the American Athletic Conference, which has Tulsa. So
Mm-hmm.
the SEC is going to have to go up against the Tulsas, Furmans, and the Big East teams.
Okay. Do you know what? Like, what's interesting is this adds an extra layer to the playoff theoretically. But if they're doing at-large bids based on points you've accumulated throughout the season, it's weird that that carries through. Because most of the time, once you start a tournament, everything is wiped clean, and you start fresh, and everybody's record is 0-0. But if you're saying that they're going to fill this at-large field for the national meet using some sort of points criteria, they're going to have to go back to the regular season, correct?
Yeah, that's a good point because if you're going to use, there's basically 2 at-large selections. You have the at-large to go to regionals and the at-large to go to nationals.
Right.
And are you going to use regular season twice for that?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't
I
know.
just bring it up. I just bring it up because when Dave Smith talked about it with Alex and Ryan, he talked about making the desire sometimes is to make cross country like other sports, but this is certainly something they would not do in the other sports. They wouldn't say, okay, well, your regular season record is gonna impact your seeding, and then but once the tournament starts, you play. That's it. You just keep going.
Yeah, and I think the way to avoid that, right? Because basically right now the way they're we have 80 teams. They're picking 3 from each region, so that's 15, and then you got to find the remaining 17 at large for nationals because they're going to pick 32
Mm-hmm.
to nationals instead of 31. The reason why they need to do at large is because these regions are not even. However, if they throw out this whole like geographic situation to the region and we just pick
Reseed
our
them.
80,
Yeah.
reseed them in the regions, then all you got to do is say, oh, these are the 5 regions. Okay. Just the top 6 in each region.
Yep.
Go. If you're 7th in your region, you're not going.
Yeah. And that's what we talked about before.
We know that.
Add it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. But I don't
that's what
know
they do in everywhere.
Yeah. I think there's probably a sensitivity around travel
Every
budgets,
sport
I would
reseed.
guess. Yeah. Yeah.
But like, how? I don't know. Like, you could. I mean, you're gonna know if you made the meet 2 weeks out because conferences will be 2 weeks out from this meet.
Yeah.
Hell, you could. I think if you know where you're going on the Sunday 2 weeks out, you can buy a plane ticket to this place. And I think they would even, they would probably, what they would do is be like, all right, we know these are the top 8 seeds. We're going to give them favorability on where they are located, right? That's how they do in the March Madness, right? They put Duke in the southeastern bracket if they're the number 1 seed. So
what you're saying here, let me clarify what you're saying, what you'd like to see, what wrinkle you'd like to add on what you think is a plan that's inevitable based on the reporting, and we'll call it reporting, that you've done talking to other coaches. We would have this conference championship weekend, which would be like March Madness almost. You'd have the Cinderella stories because you'd be watching which conference champion is going to get to make it to the first round. And some teams would get to be NCAA qualifiers in a sport that they haven't been NCAA qualifiers for. Okay. So they would all go in. You'd have all those conference champions. They'd go in. Then you'd pick the at-large teams based what we think on a point system similar to we have now. That would be 80 teams. You divide them between 5 regions, right? 16 teams a region. Is that what you do?
Yeah. Or you could do
but you
4
would seed
regions,
them.
but yeah, you seed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's just say, yeah. So then you'd seed them, right? And there would be some watch party where they would unveil the seeds, and you'd evenly distribute them out of these into these 5 regions, 16 teams a region, and then that would allow you in your next step when that regional meet happens to just take the top. I guess if you took 5, that would be 25. If you did 6, that would be 30, something like that, on to the NCAA championship. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. And you can also then you also will be able to seed the at-large individuals, right? We're like, hey, these are our
Mhm.
30 individuals we are sending to regionals, and we seed it. So now here's the caveat with the seeding situation. What do you do if the women team is seated in the North region and your men's team is seated in the Southeast region?
Ah, good point. Cross country can never be easy.
Yeah, because we're the only sport where we decided that like we're gonna have a coach that coaches both sports.
Yeah.
You don't have like a men's basketball coach who's also the women's basketball coach, right? Or like, oh, we
Yeah.
got to make sure the Duke women's team and the Duke men's team are going to the same place. But we had to do
Yeah.
that because we're crazy. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, technically,
That
you could
is,
argue that we shouldn't need to worry about that because there's a lot of programs that are separate, and there's a lot of
yeah.
times, the Arkansas women go to pre-nets and the Arkansas men go to Nuttycombe or something like that. Like that happens.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
you
I
have,
bet, now that you brought that up, I bet that's the main reason why it's not happening. Travel is probably in there as well too, but that's probably the main reason. And it's one of those things where it's like, do we inconvenience a few people to make a better overall product, or do we keep things the way they were? I mean, an assistant coach can handle it at that point. You're not
yeah,
drawing plays up. This is not
exactly.
football or basketball or volleyball or softball. You're not deciding which relief pitcher to go to. If there's any sport where you can have another coach stand in, I think this is it. And these
Yeah.
teams have staffs. So to me, that's not enough of a argument. I think for the teams it might be, but if you're going to go to this system, the best way to do it is to make a clear qualifying process that both values the regular season, but also removes the regular season from the equation once it's time for championship season and lets people just have a clear path to qualify for the championships.
Exactly. When you are in the West prelims in track in the second, like the quarterfinals of West prelims, they don't
Mm-hmm.
pick who goes to nationals based off of who had the higher seed time. They just be like the
Right.
tiebreaker is who won that race, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what it should be here. And it'll be great too because even when we do seed it, there will be that one region that we'll call like the region of death, like in the World Cup style, where it'll be
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
oh man, who it's gonna be hard to find 6. I know I feel like 8 teams are good enough, but like they're only gonna
Yeah.
get 6. Who's gonna be the 7th and 8th team? And it's just gonna
Mm-hmm.
be, you could argue that 7th team is be like, this is unfair because the 6th place team in the other region sucks and we beat them 5 times. It was like, yeah, well, it's not fair that, Cinderella stories aren't fair to people who should have won, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Those are the breaks. That's sports. Like if you seed them
yeah.
and you seed them as best as you can, yes, that's why there is a group of death, because one group just ends up being really stacked, and it's not because it's necessarily unfair or there was a nefarious intent. It's just that's the way sometimes things like that break, and it all evens out. If you're going to be a championship team or you're going to be a podium team, you're going to get through your region. You're going to finish in your top 5 or top 6. I like that better. The other thing, the other fun thing about this would get me really interested in conference cross country. I would watch every single conference meet, regardless of the ability, just to see the cool stories of who gets to make it. Because there would be, just as there is in March Madness, what we call one bid leagues, meaning they're not getting any at large teams. They're going to get one
Yeah.
team through. And every year it would be fun to see. I don't know. I always liked watching those small conference tournaments growing up in basketball, and you'd get to know those sort of teams of like, oh man, is it going to be, is Florida Gulf Coast going to get it? Is Valparaiso? Choose your whatever sleeper. And then sometimes those teams, Gordon, what happens to those teams? What
They
happened to
get hot.
Butler?
They get hot.
Yeah. And they turn into programs. And it's like people start hearing about that team because they qualified and they got over a hurdle. And yeah, maybe they're not making it to the NCAA meet, but in that region, like it's cool to see a little bit of tradition formed of, oh man, this is the team that always makes it out of the Sun Belt, or this is the team that always makes it out of the WAC. And is somebody going to unseat them? That I think is, from a fan's perspective, is kind of fun. And I think just even capturing running nerds' attention is a good thing to do, because there are a lot of running nerds, but there's a lot of running nerds that tune this stuff out until it gets time for the NCAA championships.
Yeah. And when this proposal first came out, or the talk of it came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, like I said, I was thinking like, why do they keep on trying to change it? It's fine, just keep how it is. Why are we always trying to, you know, what's the word? Fix a broken
Reinvent the
wheel,
wheel.
whatever. Reinvent the wheel, right? And but it's not the coaches who are trying to do this. NCAA said we don't want 9 regions. We're not doing 9 all comers meets. You need to do 80 teams, 4 or 5 regions, conference champions auto qualify. The rest is up to you. So with that knowledge, though, that means we know it's happening. Like in 2022, we're gonna have 4 or 5 regions. Like that's happening, 100%.
Yeah.
No ifs,
Yeah.
ands, or buts. The question is, what will the structure be? And I agree
Yeah.
with you, and I think a lot of people agree that seeding is the best and the most fun structure. The question is, what is preventing seeding from happening? Maybe coaches are scared about who's doing the seeding, right? They might be like, the way they figure, but like, I mean, I think
You'll
the
do the
seating should
seeding.
be. I mean, I should do the seating, right? Yeah, but like, how do they do the seating in March Madness? It's a committee. All right, who's on the committee of March Madness seating?
Oh, people involved with teams too, because a lot of times they have to recuse themselves when their team is being discussed. But
Yeah,
you could be from Cal and be discussing the merits of Washington State, right? This is the same thing with the FBS. A lot of those, not FBS, yeah, the football playoff. Sorry, I forgot what it's even called anymore. Is it called anything, or is it just called the college football playoff? My mind is melting. I
it's called
matched
the.
up
I
BCS
think it's
with,
called the.
yeah.
Yeah, it's called college football playoff. Yeah.
There we go. Great branding there. Anyway, those people have those people, all, even if they're retired, they have ties, right? They've been an AD at this school, or they used to be the coach at this school. You're not going to find anybody who has no conflicts of interests at all, because everybody at the very least went to one of these schools. So yeah, it's not going to be imperfect, but if you do some sort of qualifying system to the first round and then you seed it, you'll figure it out. And I don't think you have anybody to blame. If you don't like your seed, you could have run better in the first round. And if you don't like where you're at in the first round, like that's just not, like, you got to start from somewhere. There is no perfect system.
Yeah, the only thing that the seating's going to do is I do think super deep, like just like mentally, if you get mentally the 6th team at Pac-12 is just going to have a little bit of a like, hey, you're not that good to person who gets to a team that gets second in a shitty region in a shitty conference. Yes, we'll know that Pac-12 team is most likely better, but for some reason, when you have the word 6th next in your conference name versus saying runner up, it just sounds better. And I think
Yeah.
if you're in a deep conference, like you're gonna if you know that you're not gonna be top 3 in your conference, you got to make sure you have a resume that people are gonna be like, oh, okay, it's impressive, right?
Yeah.
And all
Yeah.
I
But
want,
again,
yeah,
go ahead.
I mean,
Go ahead.
it's not going to work for most teams because, like, if you're good enough to just auto qualify, you're auto qualify out of conference. But it would be great if more and more teams took the regular season more seriously instead of like, oh, we're just, we're just here to see the course. Oh, we're just here for, putting a good
I
effort.
love
Oh,
that.
oh, we're just here. We don't want to get anyone hurt, so we're only racing 75% of the team. The only, because I mean, coaches and runners are so finicky and superstitious and like overly cautious about their athletes that they're like scared to race them, you know, and I would hope that a lot of coaches would be like, no, we're racing. We want to we need to win. The same way as
Hmm.
Duke basketball doesn't say, oh, we'll just be 500 the regular season and then we'll show up at the ACC playoffs. No, we want
Hmm.
to go undefeated or, have a lot of victories. And it's crazy
I
because they
was,
run every day and yet you
yeah,
can't race every other week. It's just crazy.
I was surprised this year. Coach K showed up to a game against North Carolina and said they were there just to check out the rims, just to see how they felt. And they played half their roster. They left everybody else back. They did a tempo run that morning. It was great though. It was a great tempo run that they did.
Yeah.
They're
And then
they're
I
feeling
think,
really good for
yeah,
March.
Zion Williamson, their star basketball player, they're just like, hey, we're just going to save you for the playoffs. You're going to sit
Yeah,
the regular season. Yeah.
he'll do two games total. That's it. Going to put him on a race restriction. I agree, and there could be a ripple effect here, a rising tide lifts all boats effect, where okay, maybe the number 1 and 2 teams still can glide through, but if you are a 15th best team, are you going to want to play around now at pre-nats or at Nuttycombe? Probably not, right? And then that's going to up your game, which is going to up the 10th best team's game, which is going to move up and up and up and up to where we might see a higher quality of competition and more people racing full teams and more people racing full out. Like I want to see NAU and BYU. I've said this before. I'll say it again. I'm going to say it every day until September or whenever they race. I want to see them race 3 times next year. I don't want to just see them once. I want to see those 2 teams
Yeah.
go full out next year several times and throw in. I know you're big on Arkansas too. You could throw them in too, but I want to see that multiple times. I don't want to just see them once because why would we want to see great teams only match up once per year? I want to see it multiple times.
Yeah. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. So, man,
Who are
I,
your who are your winners and losers in this scenario if it comes to fruit? So I would say one winner would be fans of conference championships, which I will put
yes.
myself in that. I will put myself in that. I didn't think I was until now, but now I am. But run through who benefits the most and who benefits the least from this new scenario.
Well, it depends geographically.
Mm-hmm. Sure, sure.
Okay. So, in that situation, Big 12 is the biggest winners because they get to race against 4 other conferences or 5 other conferences that don't care about cross country. So they
Mm-hmm.
just have their conference meet and then they just have the meet again because like the top 20 finishers are going to be the same top 20 finishers at Big 12 that are at the region. Like, I mean, it's kind of similar to the South Central Regional with Arkansas and Texas, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah. So Big 12's big winners, big losers, I would say is like middle of the pack West and Mountain teams because now all of a sudden they're going up against each other where that all your auto you're not like when you have BYU, NAU, Oregon, Stanford, Washington, all these teams together, you're fighting for 10th. You're fighting for 7th. And so those are the losers, I guess. But maybe they're winners. Maybe it pushes them to be better. But yeah, losers would be West/Mountain teams, and winners are the Big 12 conference.
Yeah. No, I agree with it. But nothing is permanent. This could be cyclical in some regard in terms of areas of the country that get really, really good at cross country as well too. Maybe not as much in that South region, just because it seems like just fewer traditional powers, and I know traditional powers can change throughout the years, but I mean there is a chance that some of the other regions could become the new West in 5, 10, 15 years, right?
I don't know. All right. So when would BYU ever stop being good? Do you see that happening in the next 10 years? No, I don't.
That's a good. Yeah,
NAU,
it's
I
a good.
don't. Portland, I don't. Stanford, no. Colorado, no. Oregon, no. Washington with the Pals, no. Like I just
Okay, maybe next 20 years. Let's extend this a
maybe
little.
yeah.
I guess if we're going to continue the basketball analogy, the ACC has never been bad, but that there's been years when the ACC is better than others, right?
Yeah. That's true.
Sometimes they get, 8 teams in. Sometimes they might get 4 teams in.
I mean, think about those. The South region. These are the teams that for on the women's side, the South region,
Mm-hmm.
Iowa State, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Texas. Like
Mm-hmm.
Iowa State didn't make so last year. The only team to make it to NCAAs out of this new created South region is Texas, and they finished
Yeah.
30th.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's there's if you're a women's team in the South, that's good because you're going because you don't need to be good. I mean, Oklahoma State and Iowa State had off years, and that's why they didn't make the meet. They were with injuries and stuff. But
Why wouldn't they, for equity's sake, why wouldn't they put the SEC in this region and then swap them out for one of these non-Power 5 regions? Why couldn't they do that?
I don't know. Maybe they'll need to do that. Maybe they'll be like, hey, yes, I don't know, swap out the SEC with the SWAC or something like that. But
Yeah,
then if you
because
do,
you're saying
but if you do that, then Big East just has a cakewalk, right?
was it Big East, Furman, who else?
And
What's the
Tulsa,
okay? What's the one to the east of the West? What's the westernmost non-West region? Is it Central? You said.
North Central. So it's
Who's in that?
Atlantic, North Central, South, Southeast, and West.
Okay,
So North
who's in
Central
the yeah?
is Michigan, Wisconsin, Iona, Purdue, Indiana, Eastern Kentucky. So it's Big Ten and
Yeah, tell me the
Iona and Eastern
conferences.
Kentucky. Oh, the conferences.
Yeah,
Uh,
you said Big Ten, and the
yeah, it's Big Ten, the Horizon, the MAC, the Missouri Valley, Ohio Valley, and Summit.
okay, and then who's in the northeastern region or the Atlantic, whatever region?
America East, Atlantic 10, ACC, Colonial, Ivy, Northeast, and Patriot.
Okay,
There's
it
a
just
lot
seems
of
like you
bad
got.
conferences. That's what you learn is like
Well,
there's a lot of
yeah,
conference champions who aren't good. Yeah.
there's a lot of I mean, Power 5 is just 5 conferences, right? And then you throw in, okay, who's really really good that's not in a Power 5 conference, right? There's definitely a handful of teams,
Yeah.
but
You have
it's
like
not a huge amount of
BYU's,
teams.
NAU's, Iona's, but there's not that many. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whoever's
New
hot at the Ivy
Mexico.
League that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was just trying to figure out a way. Is there a way to push? Is there a way to push a Western team into the Central region? What is there a way to push a Western conference? But since these things are linked to conferences, it's not like you can just say, "Oh, hey, Colorado, New Mexico, you guys go over here," like they did with the Mountain. It's all moving as one big, one
Yeah.
big conference.
Which I think is a bad idea. They need to do seeds. It needs to be we need to be creating the regions 2 weeks out, not creating the
Mhm.
regions 2 years out. You know,
Okay,
we need
so
to create the regions 2 weeks out. Yeah.
explain one more time though, because we've put a lot of information out here. Explain one more time how you'd like to see the qualification process go from beginning to end.
Again, based on the parameters that the NCAA is making the coaches decide on, which is 80 teams qualify for regionals using 4 or 5 regions. I think 5 would be fine because 16 versus 20 per region. 16 seems a little thinner to deal with. So 5 regions, 16 teams per region. Fill out the regions based on the 32 conference champions and then add 56 at large bids. And when you add all the bids, spread them out evenly. So seed all 5 regions equally. Once all 5 regions are seeded equally, you run all the regions at the same day, and we pick the top 6 finished teams from each region. And then that is your field.
And then individuals.
So individuals is interesting. I mean, I guess the way they are doing individuals, we haven't talked about, we'll talk about individuals before we sign off. So they plan on doing individuals, 128 individuals.
Okay.
So it's individuals who aren't on, who qualify for all the regions. So what's 128 divided by 5? I don't think you can divide
128.
120.
No, that'd be a tough one, but I can try right here. It is 25.6.
Okay. So I think it's about 25 per region.
Okay.
It's like
Okay.
19. What? I don't know. Anyway, so just assuming what they're going to do is they're going to send about 25 to each region. And then I think they're going to take the top 3 in each region or something like that.
Okay, to nationals. So 25 to each. I thought I saw. So are they going to do at-large individuals, or is that all
No,
just
they're
through
not.
conference?
So they're not going to do at-large individuals. So
Okay, that's tough in the
basically, it's going
Pac-12.
to, yeah. But, yeah, it is, I guess. But if your team, how many teams are going to be in the top tier, right? Is it though?
I'm just
I
thinking.
don't know.
I'm. Well, I guess it depends what the cutoff. What's the cutoff number? I'm not sure, but there's plenty of individuals that could finish. I feel like could be like top 50, but they're in really stacked conferences,
So
right? Like
let's
if
look
you
at
go to.
look. I'm bringing up Pac-12 results. So assuming taking the top 4 individuals. So this
Mhm.
is who finished. So is a Colorado athlete? No. Oregon? No. Washington? No. Stanford? UCLA? No. Stanford? No. Colorado? Oregon. So the first
Well, UCLA didn't make the
non-team,
meet though.
but UCLA will probably make regionals.
Oh, I see what you're doing. Okay, yeah,
Yeah, this is to make regionals. So the first person to make regionals would be the 25th finisher, which was Carlos Villarreal
yeah.
from
Okay,
Arizona. So like the
okay.
individual coming out will be the 25th place guy, the 36th, the 37th, and let's say the 39th. So I
Got to
think
finish top 4.
you got to finish top 4 individually. And I think if you're in a really deep conference, you're fine because all the people that beat you are going to be on the actual team. So they don't count.
Okay. All right. You're okay with that? You'd keep that?
Yeah, I guess the only situation where it becomes iffy is if it's like a weird conference where there's just a lot of good individuals. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, you have to be top 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue controversial take. Maybe we take out the individual aspect to cross country out. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? I know
Yeah, I don't think
it's
we should
like
do
2
that.
different races going on. You have the individual race and the team race, but why isn't
Mm-hmm.
it just a team race? I don't know.
Yeah.
Call me crazy.
Yeah, crazy. Don't do that. Let's just think of a clear way to do it. I think top 4 is fine. As everybody knows the rules going in. And listen, if you can't get top 4 in your conference, are you going to be a national contender? No, not unless you had a horrible day. And if you had a horrible day, that's sports, right? Some people have horrible days at the most inopportune times. But
It is going to
I'm
make sure
thinking
you're
of,
healthy that far out, right? Like
yeah,
say, I mean, what's
yeah, sure.
yeah, think about that.
It's
Some
just
people who are like,
weird
"Hey, we're
though.
taking conferences off." Yeah.
Okay, here I figured out why it's weird. Here's why it's weird. Uh, it's almost harder to qualify to regionals than it would be to qualify to the national meet for some individuals,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Because then you go to a, depending on how they do the regions, but then if they do the regions the way they're saying, let's take the Big 12 for example, right? In their region, it might be hard to finish top 4 that year because you're going against Edwin Kurgat and Isai Rodriguez and whatever, and there's some non-qualifying people from Texas or whatever. It might be hard to get top 4 on a non-qualifying team. But then you go to region, and you're the best individual by far there, right? And the qualifying process is a bit more forgiving there.
Well, I think the main thing is there's going to be a lot of individuals that make it to regionals who suck because they're going to be in the SWAC or the Horizon or the Summit, like where they don't have any good teams nor have any good individuals, but they're going to be able to go because like think about
Yeah,
this,
and
like
I get why they're doing
like
that. But.
I get why they're doing it, but think about the southern. All right, here this is. I'm going to bring up Furman XAT first. In this
He's going
system,
to T
these will
first.
be the individual qualifiers to. Where is it?
Is Southern a one bid league?
So Southern Furman will go, right?
Yeah, is that it though?
But no, I don't want to do. I'm gonna do Iona.
Okay,
Regardless,
he's doing
Furman.
Iona, folks. We're
Doing
switching to
Iona.
Iona.
Hear me out. So Iona is going to win their conference, right? So Iona is going to
That's what I've
go
heard.
to. They're going to go to conferences, but these will be the top 4 individuals in the MAC conference that will get to go to regionals when you take out Iona. It'll be Evans Cabet of Siena, who finished 6th. Then it'll be Aiden Giluli of Siena, who finished 12th. Then it'll be Ramsey Little of Marist, who finished 14th. And then Anthony Belfato of Kent. So, like, who's this Ramsey Little kid? He's
Poor
actually not
guy.
that bad.
He just go.
That's not that bad, actually. 1430,
Well,
5K. So, okay,
yeah.
I'll give him.
No, look. I think they should go. I think it's kind of weird the way it's set up. It's a very narrow funnel to get into the region if you're an individual, depending on the spot that you're in, and then from there, it's like because with this system, well, I guess what you talked about before with the teams, there's be a lot of at-large bids in the West, right? Like New Mexico women are still going,
Yeah.
right? Even though, like, well, they ended up the year really well, but like this year, you could have seen a scenario where they're behind BYU, they're behind Stanford, they're behind Washington, they're behind all these other teams, but they would be fine with at-large bid. Is Wayne Kaladi going to be able to make the meet? That's just what we need to make sure happens.
Yeah. Wayne Cloudy's
Okay.
going to go. We're good on that.
Yeah.
Alabama will still get their 2 Kenyans in every year, so we're good on that. But in the end, I just think what they need to do is they need to throw out geography as a constrainer and only seed based on talent, not based on where your building is located.
But you like the auto qualifiers from conference. That's a thing you like, and you like the at-large bids based on season performance. Okay.
Yeah.
It's good. You're on the record. That's good.
On the record.
Well,
this isn't happening until 2022. So
it's literally 2 years away.
We'll re-banner this podcast in 2 years. Anything else happen before we sign off? We'll look at emails tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah, not much. Short week. Dave Verdisha had surgery. We might have a story up on that, so stay tuned for more. But that's all I got on my rundown. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Gordon. Thanks to Lon for producing. FloTrackPodcast@gmail.com is the email address. We'll talk to you guys next time.